I'm Megan Thompson. I am 34, and for the last 13 years, I haven't done family dinners. No group chats, no surprise visits. I learned a long time ago that quiet is way safer than chaos, and work makes a lot more sense than people. I run a late night dessert business from a big kitchen on the east side of Denver. Cakes, bars, pastries, whatever pays the bills and keeps my head on straight. Last month, my business just blew up in a way I never saw coming. Orders were flying in, I landed huge contracts, and all of a sudden my bank account was telling a story I'd never even dared to think about. I could finally ditch my tiny apartment. So I bought a house way bigger than any place I grew up in, bigger than I ever imagined I'd need. It's got a kitchen that feels like a new beginning and a bunch of rooms I haven't figured out what to do with yet. I moved in with basically nothing, just a folding chair and a box of leftover cupcakes. And this feeling, like I'd finally crossed a line from the person I was forced to be to the person I built all by myself. For the first time in a long, long time, everything was calm. And then the next morning, my past showed up on my doorstep. I'm not even kidding. I hadn't laid eyes on them in 13 years. But there they were, standing on my new front porch, acting like it had been a long weekend instead of more than a decade. They showed up with luggage, a ton of expectations, and that kind of confidence people have when they think they still own a piece of you. What happened when I opened that door? That's why I'm telling you this story. Before I tell you the rest, let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are? And where are you watching from? I'm just curious to see how far this story goes. It's weird how families just fall into these roles without anyone even noticing. For me, it started way before I understood how heavy it was to be the oldest kid. I learned how to be responsible the way other kids learn to play the piano. They just drilled it into me. I was picking up extra shifts at a diner when I was barely old enough to drive, bringing home these small paychecks, and just trying to patch up whatever was broken at home. Nobody asked me to. It was just clear that I was the one who had to keep things from falling apart. My younger sister, Olivia Thompson, basically grew up on a different planet. She had this softness to her that adults always mistook for innocence. She never had to explain herself, because someone always jumped in to do it for her. A scraped knee got her a ton of sympathy. A missed assignment got her excuses. A bad decision got her a hug. I just watched this all play out from the sidelines. I stood there so long it just started to feel normal. My mother was constantly worried about Olivia, like she was wrapped in bubble wrap. If Olivia was tired, we all had to whisper. If Olivia was stressed, our plans changed. If Olivia cried, the whole house just stopped and revolved around her. I didn't hate her for it back then. I just learned to deal with it. I handled the rides, the chores, the errands, anything to keep the peace. But the one thing I couldn't get used to was the way they started to look at me. It happened slowly. You know the way things get unbalanced over time when all the pressure is on one side. If a wallet went missing, I was the first person they asked. If an appointment was forgotten, they just assumed I didn't pass on the message. Even when I tried to clear things up, my mom would just get this tight look on her face. The kind of look that said I was the one making things complicated. Everything finally clicked for me one summer afternoon when Olivia lost a little bit of cash she'd saved for a school trip. It wasn't a lot, just enough for a snack or something, but the way she flipped out changed everything. She stood in front of our mom, her eyes getting all watery, and she was breathing all shaky. She just held her hands up like, why me? I tried to tell them I didn't touch her money, but the whole mood in the room just changed. Mom wasn't mad. She was just disappointed, like I'd failed some secret test. That's when I got it. Explanations didn't matter in our house. Feelings were always more important than facts. Olivia didn't look evil or anything. She just had this look like someone who knew that playing the victim always worked. After that day, the house just ran on a new set of rules that I had no control over. If Olivia had a late project, it was my fault, because I didn't remind her. If she missed the bus, it's because I took too long in the bathroom. If she was acting all anxious, it was because I wasn't being supportive enough. Nobody ever said this stuff out loud. But things you don't say have a way of piling up. I just threw myself into my job because at least it made sense. A shift starts on time, it ends on time, and when you work hard, you can actually see the results. Home wasn't like that. Anytime I tried to correct something they got wrong, it just made things even tighter. So I just learned to shut up and take it. The less I fought back, the easier things were. That's when the distance really started. It wasn't some big dramatic fight. It was the quiet kind of distance that grows in the corners when no one's paying attention. The kind you don't even see happening until it's the only way you all communicate. And pretty soon that silence was behind everything that came next. There's a point where you can't ignore the way your family is anymore. It just gets too heavy to carry. For me, that moment came on a cold morning when everything at home finally broke and there was no way to fix it. I'd let Olivia Thompson borrow my old car to run a quick errand. It wasn't the first time she'd used it, but it was the first time she brought it back with the front bumper caved in and a long gash scraped down the side. She walked in the house already shaking, holding her coat like she was the one who got hurt, not my car. By the time I walked into the kitchen, her story was already set in stone. She didn't have a lot of details, but the story was perfectly crafted to get the reaction she always got. Then I heard my name, and the way they said it, you'd think I was the one responsible for all this. I couldn't ask any questions. There was no room to get the story straight. They'd already made up their minds. I just stood there realizing the actual truth had no place in the story they'd all decided to believe. After that morning, things started changing in small ways. Holidays came and went without anyone asking what I thought. Plans got made. And family things happened that I just wasn't invited to. They didn't kick me out, not really. I just drifted away because the door was always just out of reach. I tried to hang on, but every time I tried to explain myself, it just pushed me further away. So eventually I just gave up. I packed the little I had and moved into a studio across town. I thought moving out would give us some space that a little time apart would clear things up. But the distance just made things worse. Suddenly, I was the sister who ran away and made everything so complicated. The one who chose her own life and didn't care about anyone else. None of it was true. But we weren't living in the same reality anymore. 13 years is a long time to be cut off from the people who were once your whole world. During those years, I just worked. I did whatever it took to make rent. I was up at dawn making coffee. I cleaned offices late at night, and I learned to bake in quiet kitchens while the whole city was asleep. Work was the one thing that made sense. It wasn't trying to be anything else. You put in the effort, you got a result. And that's what kept me going. Meanwhile, my sister Olivia was creating this whole new story for herself online. I had no idea at first. I wasn't following any of my family's accounts, but you know how it is? Word gets around, especially when it's juicy. I heard she was making these vague posts about betrayal, about healing, and finding strength after someone just up and leaves you. She'd write about being abandoned, about having to carry all this weight by herself, about loving someone who didn't love her back. She never used my name, of course, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. It was so weird watching our relatives just eat it all up. They'd comment with prayers and all this encouragement. They'd remind her that family should always forgive. They shared her posts, and I'd hear about the long, supportive messages they sent her from other people. It was obvious they had created this whole other version of me in their minds. I was this cold-hearted person built out of rumors and what they wanted to believe because that was easier than seeing who I really was. Every year we drifted further apart. My birthdays came and went with nothing from them. At one point, my mom changed her number and didn't even tell me. Snorts. My cousins got married and I wasn't invited. I heard later that I got a shout-out in a speech, though, as the sister who lost her way. I never corrected them. I just didn't have the energy to fight a story they were so comfortable believing. The silence between us just got louder. It became this predictable, quiet thing. And in that silence, I started building a life that was all mine. You know, growth isn't something you see happening in real time. It just happens in these little moments, and you only really get it when you look back later. For me, it all started in a shared kitchen I rented by the hour on the east side of Denver. I always took the late-night slot. For one, it was cheaper, and for two, nobody else wanted it. Those hours were mine to mess up recipes, burn a few batches, and just learn without anyone looking over my shoulder. At first, I'd just get a few orders through text from my coworkers or their friends. It was like 5 boxes of cookies one week, then 7 the next. I knew I was making progress by how often I had to buy more flour and sugar, or by how many mornings I felt that blast of heat from the oven before sunrise. It wasn't glamorous, not at all, but it was steady. And steady was exactly what I needed. It went from a hobby to a real business when an office manager ordered a ton of stuff for a company party. It wasn't a huge order, but I had to prep more than I ever had before. I spent that whole week whisking batter till my hands shook, timing every tray perfectly and obsessing over the labels on each box. I heard back from them right after the delivery. The office called again the next month, and then again just 2 weeks later. Word got around fast to other small companies, the kind that order treats for parties or long meetings. My orders doubled, and then they tripled. I bought bigger mixing bowls, stronger containers, and a second set of baking pans so I didn't have to stop and wash stuff between batches. I started writing down all my expenses and income in a notebook, figuring out how much I could put back into the business, and deciding when it was okay to take a risk. Eventually, the shared kitchen just wasn't cutting it. I needed more storage, more fridge space, more room to work. Renting my own kitchen was a big financial leap, but it was also the first time I really felt like I was betting on myself. The new kitchen was small and industrial, squeezed between a repair shop and a warehouse. It smelled a little like metal and cleaning stuff, but for the hours I rented it, it was mine. And that changed everything. More space meant more orders. I started making bars, cakes, and custom desserts too. My delivery schedule was nuts. I was up before sunrise restocking in the afternoon and working late into the night. For the first time in my life, being exhausted felt worth it, not just draining. The numbers I was seeing showed me this could actually last. I wasn't getting rich, but it was steady. That was something I'd never had in my life. When I hired my first part-timer, a quiet college kid, to do the labeling and packing, the work finally felt like something I could handle. The business wasn't just all on me anymore. It had a real structure, a rhythm, and I could see it going somewhere. I wrote everything down. How much of everything, what costs were changing, what customers liked best. Every batch felt like I was moving forward, even if it wasn't perfect. The real game changer was when a local cafe chain called me. They'd tried one of my dessert bars at a networking event. They wanted me to deliver to a bunch of their cafes every week. I was honestly scared by the size of it, but I knew this was a huge opportunity. We worked out a schedule so the quality wouldn't suffer, so I said yes. The contract meant I had steady money coming in. I could finally start making real plans for the future, things I never let myself think about before. As the orders kept growing, I just knew my life was finally getting on solid ground, something with real momentum. I saved every penny I could, tracked all the profits, cut out costs I didn't need, and I didn't let myself get ahead of myself and expand too fast. Every month that went by, I felt more secure. And all that stability led somewhere I never thought I'd be buying a house. When I first walked through the house, I didn't see some fancy place. I saw what it could be. A kitchen with enough counter space for tons of trays, a living room big enough for team meetings and extra rooms for storage or just some peace and quiet. Signing the papers felt totally unreal, not because of the house, but because I couldn't believe how many years it took to get to that moment. When I walked in, I knew. The life I had now was nothing like the one I left behind. The morning they showed up felt like a pop quiz I didn't study for. I'd only been in the house a little while, still getting used to the quiet when the sound of a car on the gravel broke the silence. I saw movement on the security camera. 2 people getting out of a car, acting like they owned the place. One of them had a suitcase. The other was looking at the porch, sizing up what she thought was hers. Seeing them on my screen after 13 years was just weird. It was Olivia Thompson, my younger sister, walking with that same cocky attitude she'd had since she was a kid, the kind you get when you think rules don't apply to you. And right behind her was Patricia Thompson, my mother, clutching her sweater like she expected a welcome party. Neither of them looked nervous. They didn't even pause. They just walked up like they'd been invited. I didn't run to the door. I just watched them for a minute, long enough to see it all again. The way they stood, the way they just assumed 13 years meant nothing, and I'd just let them in. But something inside me was solid. I walked over to the entry table and picked up the folder I'd had ready for days. The weight of it felt like a promise I was finally keeping to myself. I only opened the door a crack, on purpose. I kept the opening small to stay in control, but wide enough that there'd be no misunderstanding. They were right there, so close I could see the fresh polish on Olivia's nails and the annoyed look on my mother's face. You'd never guess how much time had passed. Olivia grabbed her suitcase handle, so sure of herself. She started to turn toward the door, like walking in was just the next step, and she didn't need my permission. My mother stood right behind her, just like she used to when she expected me to do what I was told without a fight. For a second, they waited for the old me, the quiet, obedient one who always put everyone else's comfort first. But I just stood there. I didn't open the folder in my hand, but just holding it put up a wall they weren't expecting. And just like that, everything changed. Olivia's smug look slipped just for a second. My mother's face got hard, a look I knew all too well. It was the look she gave when she thought I owed her. Holding my ground felt different, powerful. I didn't yell or try to explain. I just let the locked door do the talking. I held the folder out a little bit. I wasn't handing it to them, but I wasn't hiding it either. I was just making sure they saw it. Inside was a guest license, a notarized no trespass notice, and a list of every dollar, every debt, and every lie they used to slowly push me out of the family. This folder was proof. It was me finally writing it all down instead of just taking it. The air got thick. Olivia shifted her weight, trying to figure out her next move. My mother's eyes went from my face to the folder and then to the tiny crack in the door. She was finally getting it. This wasn't her house to command anymore. I didn't feel any need to break the silence. It wasn't my job to make them feel better. They were waiting for me to let them in. I didn't. I didn't shout or repeat what the papers already made clear. The line was drawn whether they accepted it or not. I finally took a step back, not to invite them in, but to put the folder on that little table behind me. I did it on purpose. A reminder that from now on, every single decision was mine and mine alone. The moment just hung there, nobody said a word. We all knew how much had changed in all those years apart. By the time I finally shut the door, the house felt different. Not just quieter, my life was already quiet. This felt defined, like the walls themselves finally understood the new rules. I stood there for a minute, just letting the adrenaline settle before I walked back to the kitchen. It didn't take long for my phone to start buzzing. The timing was so predictable, it was almost like a script. Trouble always travels down the same road. The first texts were from cousins I hadn't talked to in over a decade. Screenshots of posts started popping up one after the other. I didn't open the messages, but the previews told me everything. Olivia didn't waste any time twisting the story. There were pictures of my front porch with captions making it sound like she came looking for help and I was just cruel. She knew how to work social media just like she knew how to work our family. The sympathy for her started rolling in just like always. I didn't answer. Responding would have just pulled me right back into the game she's been running for years. Instead, I opened my laptop, typed up a quick email, and sent it to the relatives using the same old addresses. It wasn't an explanation. I wasn't begging. It was a boundary written out plain and simple. We'd only talk through email. No discussions about money or a place to live. No accusations or guilt trips. Anything outside of that would be ignored. I didn't try to justify it. I didn't sugarcoat it. I just set the rules I should have set 13 years ago. More messages came in. A few relatives sent me paragraphs about how I was abandoning my family. Somebody said I'd forgotten where I came from. Another one insisted I owed Olivia a chance to get her life together. It was the same old guilt trip in every single message. But this time it didn't get to me. They were putting on a play I wasn't acting in anymore. Not long after my mother sent a one-line email. No hello, no punctuation. The kind of message that's meant to make you feel awful. You've broken. It was a classic guilt trip, just pretending to be worried. I closed the email without even answering. Later that night, when her name popped up in my inbox again, I didn't feel a thing. I knew exactly what she was doing. The same old tricks she thought still worked on me. She wrote about her sacrifices about raising 2 daughters alone, about all the times nobody was there for her. Every single sentence was pushing the same idea, that since I'm finally doing okay, she deserved a piece of it, and saying no was like stabbing her in the back. Scoffs. I just let the message sit there. Nothing I could say would change her story, and I finally accepted that it wasn't my job to fix it for her. Instead, I opened a new document and started listing the steps I'd take if they ever showed up at my house uninvited again. It wasn't about feelings. It was all business. Contact info for a process server, notes on property laws, and instructions on how to keep records. Putting it together felt like I was finally fixing a foundation I'd ignored for too long. The next morning was quiet, no drama, but the online chatter didn't stop. Olivia was posting vague things about toxic family, getting sympathy from people who didn't know a thing about us. I didn't check her page, but I still saw bits and pieces from notifications and forwarded texts. Her game was predictable. Act like the victim, hint that she was betrayed, and wait for everyone to back her up. It's worked for her since she was a teenager, and she wasn't about to stop now. I spent the day at my kitchen counter going over invoices, updating supply orders, and planning deliveries for the week. Work always kept me grounded, but now it was doing something else. It was proof that my life didn't depend on their approval. Everything I'd built was completely separate from what they thought of me. When evening came, the house felt calm again. Not because the situation was fixed, but because I had taken back the space their expectations used to take up. The papers on my console table sat there untouched, just waiting in case I needed them. I wasn't hoping I wouldn't have to use them. Hope had nothing to do with it. Being prepared was all that mattered. Time has a funny way of testing the lines you draw. For me, the real test came quietly, not in some big dramatic showdown, but in seeing that my life stayed completely normal after I chose not to open that door. Mornings still started with to-do lists and delivery routes. My staff still needed their instructions. The oven still had to be preheated. The mixers still needed to be scraped down. The bills still had to be paid. Nothing fell apart when I stopped letting my family's chaos into my life. The world kept spinning just fine without them. And that stability told me more than any apology ever could. About 3 months after they showed up on my porch, all the noise about them started to fade. The frantic screenshots from relatives slowed to almost nothing. The dramatic posts that got shared over and over just lost their steam. Then an email from Olivia showed up, short and strangely to the point. The subject line was about work, not drama. She just asked if I knew any places hiring for flexible shifts. There were no hidden digs, no trying to bring up old stuff. I didn't offer her a job at my bakery. Instead, I just replied with a simple list of agencies and local shops that I knew were hiring. Then I went right back to my spreadsheets and didn't wait to see what she did with it. A few weeks later, another message came through. This time, there were no words, just a photo attached. Olivia was standing in a plain uniform, an employee badge clipped to her shirt, under those fluorescent lights that give off that tired glow you only get from service jobs. It was the first picture I'd seen of her where she wasn't the star of some big tragedy. I saved the file to a folder and just left it there. I didn't see it as proof that she was a different person now. I just let it be quiet proof that any changes she made from here on out were her problem, not because I jumped in to rescue her. About 6 months later, my mom got in touch again, and this time, she wasn't putting on a show. She asked if she could just see the house. No lecture, no list of all her sacrifices. Just a simple question. I gave her a straight answer one day, one time, and she had to come by herself. When she showed up, she walked through the rooms really carefully, like she couldn't figure out what this place was. She saw the organized pantry, the baking trays all lined up, and how there wasn't clutter piled on every single surface like back at our old house. We sat at my kitchen table, and she just made small talk. You know how solid the chairs felt, how deep the sink was, and that I had enough plates for a whole table of people who actually chose to be there. She didn't say a word about the years of silence. I didn't push for an explanation. We both knew there was nothing to say. It wouldn't fix how I was always the bad guy, and Olivia was always the center of the story. What we had instead was just a short, quiet moment of honesty. Just two adults with totally different lives meeting in a place that was 100% mine. As she was leaving, she stopped and rested her hand on the doorframe. It wasn't like she was trying to claim the place or give a blessing. It felt more like a tiny hesitant nod, like she finally got that she had no say over my life anymore. And time just kept on ticking. Almost a year after I closed on the house, I heard Olivia got promoted to shift supervisor. I didn't hear it from family, but from someone we both know. They told me about it casually, like it was just another piece of work news. Her posts online changed too. At least that's what people told me. Less vague stuff about being betrayed, more tired jokes about working late and needing coffee to survive. The story she was telling everyone wasn't all about how she'd been wronged anymore. I didn't know if she was telling people a nicer story about me now or a worse one. I chose not to find out. It wasn't my job to keep up with her version of things. Through all this, I stayed completely out of their world. I wasn't going back to being the quiet fixer, their emergency cash, or their shoulder to cry on. The few times I did decide to help, I handled it like a business transaction. I was specific, I was intentional, and there were clear limits, like paying one specific bill or sending some info they could take or leave. That's it. The rest of my energy went to the people who were actually right here in front of me. My employees who showed up early and were straight with me. My neighbors who'd ask how I was doing just to be nice, not to get gossip. My friends who actually cared if I was okay and didn't need a bad guy in the story to be loyal to me. Slowly, my house became the spot for Friday night potlucks, easygoing game nights, and just chilling with pastries after a rough shift. Those empty rooms were now filled with laughter, and I didn't have to take crap or make myself smaller just to be included. That folder of documents I kept by the front door, it stayed right where I put it, ready to go, but I never had to touch it. Knowing it was there didn't make me bitter. It just made things clear. I stopped practicing what I'd say in my head. I stopped putting myself on trial, winning arguments that would never happen. I finally accepted it. Some people will always need a version of me that makes it easier for them to sleep at night. I stopped needing them to change how they saw me. My sanity was more important than being near them. Looking back, this wasn't some big revenge story. There wasn't a big movie-style moment where I won. What really happened was quieter, and to me, it was a much bigger deal. I stopped letting their denial control my life. I learned that love without limits isn't generous. It just wears you down. I learned you can wish someone well without giving them a key to your house or your bank account or your peace of mind. I learned that when people who drain you call you selfish, it doesn't mean anything. If there's one thing I hope you get from this, it's that you're allowed to close doors on people who only tear you down. You can protect the life you've built even when it's family doing the knocking. You're allowed to choose real peace over putting on an act that makes everyone else comfortable while you're just disappearing. Thanks for sticking with my story wherever you are and whatever time it is on your clock. If this whole thing got you thinking about your own boundaries, you can keep it to yourself, talk to someone you trust, or leave a comment so others don't feel so alone. But whatever you do, I hope you remember that looking out for yourself isn't being cruel. It's how you start really living.